Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillahi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Inshallah, in today's dars regarding the life of Umar bin Khattab radiyallahu an, we will continue our discussion on the subject of conquests of Syria or Shaam. As we have talked in the past, when we say Shaam, it means all the areas that include Jordan, today's Jordan, Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon, which is also sometime in English is referred as Levant. Now, last week, we started talking about the conquest of Syria, or the Shaam, but we did not discuss the real conquest, how it started. Rather, we talked about a little bit of background about the conquest of Shaam. As we said, it was started in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, continued on in the life of Abu Bakr Siddiq, and Umar bin Khattab radiallahu an, he took over at the time when the Muslims were already fighting at Yarmouk, and the leadership of the army was transferred from Khalid bin Walid radiallahu an to Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah radiallahu an. We talked about all these things last week, and today, from there on, inshallah, today we will talk about the conquest of Damascus or Damascus, which was the center of the Byzantine Empire at that time. And the way it started after Yarmouk, when the armies of the Romans, they decided to gather at the area called Fihl. And when the armies were gathering over there from different parts of the Roman Empire at that time, including Damascus and Homs, Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah, who was the leader of the Muslim army at the Yarmouk and continued on, he wrote a letter to Umar bin Khattab radiallahu an about what to be done. And the major army was gathering in the area called Fihl. And Umar radiallahu an, he gave the instructions to the Muslims how to fight and where to start from. And his instructions were to start from Damascus or Damascus, because that was the center. And the armies were gathering in Fihl. So it's better for them to start from there. And he said, then go to Homs, and after that, go to Fihl. But the idea was not just to go directly to Damascus or Damascus, rather keep the Romans busy in Homs and Fihl in a different way, whether through their own people or through the armies. A smaller part of the armies were sent down there. Now, the army that Muslims sent over there towards Damascus was about 20,000 soldiers, on contrary to Yarmouk. In Yarmouk, Muslims had 40,000 soldiers. Now, the Romans already had lower morale after the defeat of the Yarmouk, or the battle, or the Ma'arakat of Yarmouk, or the Battle of Yarmouk. While the Muslims were on the high note, they were very motivated. They just got the victory. And as I mentioned, we're talking about the 14th year of the Hijrah, Hijri calendar. And from the chronological order, we have talked about the incidents that had already happened after that in the life of Umar bin Khattab. We talked up to like 21st or 22nd Hijri time period when the Persians were defeated by the Muslims. So at this point, we are more talking about the regional chronological order. So we're taking a region and discussing in the chronological order or by the time. So as I said, when it comes to Shaam started in the time of Abu Bakr and it continued on. And now we were in the 14th year of the Hijra calendar or Hijri. And now the Muslims were following the instructions by Umar bin Khattab radiallahu an, what to be done. So he says, starts with Damascus or Damascus and head towards it, for it is the fortress of Syria and the seat of the kingdom. But the district, the Byzantines in Fihl, by sending cavalry to face them, and the people of Palestine and Homs. See, and inshallah, part of Shaam will be Palestine. That will be discussed as well when we talk about that, as we know that the Muslims opened the land of Palestine or Al-Quds during the time of Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anh. And we'll talk about how it was opened up. And his instructions was that if Allah causes us to conquer it before the Damashq, meaning the Homs and the Palestine and Fihl area, because Muslim cavalry, the smaller section of the armies were sent there. That is good. But if it conquest is delayed until Allah enables us to conquer the Damashq or Damascus, then leave some troops to hold the city and take your troops to attack Fihl. Once it is conquered, then go with Khalid to Homs. So I placed the wrong order. It's Fihl first and then Homs. So these are the cities in Shaam. Now, based on that, the armies were sent, and there were different leaderships were assigned. Now, when Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah set off towards Damashq, he did not encounter any kind of difficulty. As a matter of fact, there's an area called Ghouta to Damashq. Ghouta means an oasis which is green, has a lot of greenery over there, and it's an oasis. And they had some buildings over there even, but they left all that and they all moved towards the city of Damascus. Now, so Muslims up to the Damascus, they had no difficulty. They were the way was very clear for them, and they made it up to there. And the reason was not only that they ran away or something, it was more of the people who were left by the Heraclius. He was expecting that the people themselves will defend, while the people were already oppressed, okay? And they had no enthusiasm. They were oppressed by the Byzantine Empire. And they did not want to defend, and they left the land and they left, okay? So all those small villages that were on the way to Damashq, they were emptied out, and Muslims had no problem in taking over that land. Now, when the Muslims reached there, to the Ghouta, it's called Ghouta to Damashq, or the oasis, those houses or the palaces that they were there, they were left empty. Now, Heraclius sent some of the enforcement from Homs to fight against the Muslims. But those 500 fighters were not sufficient, and the Muslims were able to defeat them quite easily. And then before we go into the details of this battle, because Damashq was a main area, main capital. As a matter of fact, Damashq is referred as one of the oldest cities of the mankind. One of the oldest cities where the inhabitants have been living there. That's known for us. This is one of the oldest cities of the world. Now, for the Byzantine, as we know, Heraclius was the king, was a commander-in-chief as well. While Nastas ibn Bastoras was the governor of Damashq. And commander of the forces in Damascus was Bahan, who had taken part in the Battle of Yarmouk as well. He's the one who ran away from the Yarmouk, and now he was participating in the battle that was for Damashq, to protect the Damashq. Now, the number of troops that the Byzantines had were 60,000, with the possibility of another 20,000 coming from Homs, and 40,000 fighters were ready to intervene as well. So you're talking about close to 120,000 going to be there to defend the Damashq. Now, but the thing was, the Muslims, they were also using the war strategies and the tactics to keep them busy in those areas. So those armies, like 20,000 from Homs, should not make it to Damashq. And that's what the Muslims were doing. While on the other hand, when we look at the Muslims, of course, the chief commander of the Muslims was Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anh, as he was Amir al-Mu'mineen. And Umar radiallahu anh made Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah radiallahu anh as the commander for this battle, or the one who was leading in this battle was Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah. And Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah also had different Sahaba who were leading different parts of the armies, and that included Khalid bin Walid radiallahu anh as well. As we have talked about it a little bit before, just a reminder, even though Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anh removed Khalid bin Walid from the leadership position, did not affect Khalid bin Walid in any way when it comes to continue to fight in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he continued to fight as a soldier while he was a leader himself. And he was given leadership, but it was a leadership under the different leaders like Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah here. And Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah radiallahu anh himself was, when we discuss from the perspective of the Sahaba, he was one of the greatest Sahaba of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Even Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam referred to him as the Al-Amin ul-Ummah. He was the trustworthy of the Ummah. That was a title was given to Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah. Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah was from the very first few Muslims who accepted Islam in Mecca. After Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anh became Muslim, when he invited his close friends, Abu Ubaidah was one of the people who accepted Islam through Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anh. Now this army, Abu Ubaidah sent other troops under the leadership of Alqamah, Ibn Hakim, and Masruq, each of the different places in the direction of Palestine, to secure lines of reinforcement from the west and the south, meaning that the Romans should not be able to get reinforcement from those areas. So either they go and conquer those areas or keep them busy that they are not able to send their armies as reinforcement to Heraclius. Now, here, as I mentioned, Muslims' army itself was reduced to 20,000 from 40,000. As we have discussed, it could be for different reasons. Some of the Sahaba or the people who were in the army, they were martyred. Others were kept in different regions. When they were conquering the areas, to keep those areas secure under the control of the state, they had to leave part of the armies in those areas as well, until those areas were stabilized. Now, going back to the Damascus, when the fighting started, it is good for us to understand a couple of things about Damascus or the Damascus. Damascus is just another name for Damascus, just to be very clear. And this name, they were named after the founder of the city. His name was Dimshaq ibn Kin'an. And it came under the Egyptian rule, like in the 18th dynasty. And as I mentioned, it is the oldest city and was used to be a center of idol worshiping. And when the Christianity came, then that city was changed from idolatry to Christianity. And they used to have one of the biggest and very beautified kind of a temple. And that temple was converted into a church. And that church was one of the most, we're gonna call it venerous or beautified kind of church in the world at that time, except there was a church in Antakya. Now, to the north, the Damascus has the land of Al-Balqa, and the south was Golan. Golan is Golan, which we probably we hear that in the news quite a bit. Golan Heights, which we call that, or Jolan also in Arabic. This is the area which in current days is supposed to be part of Syria, but it is occupied by Israel. And the importance of that area is it's a high altitude mountainous area. It's a high altitude ground, kind of a plain. But if you have that in control, you can keep an eye on all the surrounding Middle Eastern countries. That includes Syria, that includes Palestine, that includes Jordan. So this is the importance of that geographical area which have been occupied by Israel now. So that's the Golan Heights, or Golan, the Jolan, or Jolan Murtafa. These are the names that we hear all the time in the news. This is what the area is, and this was under the Romans at that time. So now, Muslims were very familiar with Sham. So when we talk about Damascus, it is not something new for them when it comes to the area of the Damascus itself. There were Arabs already living in the area, and Muslims, in general, Arabs, even prior to Islam, they used to go for trade purposes to Sham. As we can recall, even Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he was about 12 years old, not even a prophet at that, he was not appointed as a prophet yet, and he traveled with his uncle Abu Talib. And at that time, when he met a monk named Muhira. He's the one who knew the prophecy about the prophet will be coming from the Arabian Peninsula. And when he saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he recognized him, that he is the one who will be the prophet. And he even told Abu Talib that this son is going to be a prophet, and you should send him back, because if there are people who are aware of him, and he was referring to Jews also, they might kill him. Hence, Abu Talib, he sent Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam back to Mecca at that time for the security of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The point here is not about that historical event, rather to talk about the Arabs in general. They were familiar with the area, about the Damascus. Hence, when they were going there, they were aware of how the Damascus was. And now the Damascus, since at that time the real two superpowers they were fighting with each other, or they were fighting for the power in the world, were Romans and Persians. Remember that we're still talking about 14th year of the Hijrah. So the power of the Persians was still there. Muslims defeated them in like 21st, 27th year after the Hijrah, and this is 14th year we're talking about. So they used to fight with each other. Even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the surah about Surah Rum, talk about Ghalabat Rum, that how the Romans will be taking the Ghalaba over the Persians, and then the Persians will taking over, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned. So these two superpowers were fighting with each other. Hence, Damascus was very fortified kind of a city. It was secured by the walls, and as it mentioned, the walls, the areas where needed the wall, the rest was, of course, geographically already secure. So the areas where they needed to protect the city, they built the wall in a manner that was, as it's mentioned, that the width of the wall was 3 meters. 3 meter is quite a bit. That's the width of the wall. And the height of the wall was 6 meters. So it's not that easy to climb. And on top of that, on those areas, they dug up the trenches outside the wall, which was about 3 meters wide also. And those trenches, what they did was they redirected the water of the river Barada. So those trenches were filled with water. So they made it in a kind of a look like a natural way of the city was secured, and it seemed like a natural way because the water was flowing there, the walls were built. So there was a lot of engineering work was done by Byzantines. So it's not that easy to go in there. This is why when the Romans, they hid inside Damascus, they felt themselves they were secure. They cannot be defeated. Hence, they went inside and they said, we can just stay inside. And the Muslims, because of the temperature drops quite a bit over there, they will just go back and they will not be able to sustain the siege if they want to do the siege. Because if you have a city like in a fortress kind of a situation, only way for you to really get into the fight would be to siege, to create a siege, or then they will come out and then you fight. If they don't come out, you can't fight. So that's what they were hoping for. And so first understand that how they were trying to protect themselves. And their idea was more, they were protecting themselves from the Persians. Persians were the power for them. But now they were against the Muslims as well. Now, when the Muslims came, they were not hoping that Muslims will be able to fight back, or they will just give up the siege and they will return back. But what Muslims did, or Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah radiallahu anh did, he placed different generals with different number of troops, cavalries, and the one with the armors uh, at different gates of the city. Because if there are such a wide walls and high walls, the only way for in and out is now is the gates. So there were multiple gates over there for the city. So at the end, at the eastern gate, he put the army under the leadership of Khalid bin Walid. At the gate of Jabiya, under the leadership of Abu Ubaidah ibn Jarrah himself. At the gate of Tuma, under the leadership of Amr bin al-As. And the gate of Al-Faradis, under the leadership of Shurahbil bin Hasana. And there was a small gate, Al-Bab al-Saghir, under the leadership of Yazid ibn Abi Sufyan. Now, the Byzantines were thinking Muslims will not be able to do the siege because the temperature drops quite a bit, it becomes cold, and you're talking about the people who are coming from Arabian Peninsula. Yes, it gets cold also, but the area in the Syria in the north, it gets more severe than the Jaziratul Arab. But the Muslims, of course, they were motivated by the Aqidah of Islam, the Tawheed, what they're carrying, and they were not fighting for their personal causes. They're fighting for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hence, that was the motivational factor for them. And as some of the reports talk about, the siege continued on for about 70 days. And 70 days is, you're talking about over 2 months. So the way the Muslims did, because there's an area, as I mentioned, about Al-Ghouta. Al-Ghouta was not too far away from Damascus, but they left their palaces or the houses empty. So Muslims were rotating the army over there. Some Muslims stayed they're doing the siege, while others will go back, relax, they re-energize. When they get re-energized, they would come back. This way, they were able to keep the siege for such a long period of time. Now, during this whole time, Muslims were still trying to figure out how to enter into the city. And Khalid bin Walid radiallahu anh was the first one who was able to break into the city. And the way he did was, he was trying to get any information he could have gotten from the city, and they found out about the patriarch of the Damascus had a baby, and they were celebrating. And while they were celebrating, many of the people who were part of the guarding the walls or guarding the city, they also went back and started drinking and eating and all those things. They were engaged in that. And Khalid bin Walid radiallahu anh, what he did was, he used some sort of a floating device, was a plank or whatsoever it was, so they were able to cross that 3-meter long the trenches that they had, and then they created some ladders out of the ropes, and they climbed up the wall. And Khalid himself was part of it, Qaqa ibn Amr and Madhur ibn Adi. These are the ones who went up, and then they said when we go up and we say takbir, then the others can come up. Once they had sufficient number of people on the wall, they went on the other side and they opened the gate. Once they opened the gate, the armies of the Muslims were able to enter into Damascus. And this is where the Muslims were able to get into the Damascus and able to face the army of the Herakl or the Byzantines, and Muslims were able to conquer. The start of the conquest of Damascus started. Of course, another whole thing was conquered right away. But as the reporters talk about, they say that some of them say the Damascus was opened by force, others say it was opened by the treaty. And in general, they say that the part of the city was opened by force in the beginning, and then they started doing the treaties with the Muslims. Hence, much part of Damascus come into under the control of the Muslims by the treaties. As we know, in Islam, it's not just the fighting through which you carry the Islam to the people. If there are treaties are made by the people who are not Muslim, then you make the treaties with them, and they can become part of Ahlul Dhimma, And about Ahlul Dhimma, we talked about that. These are the people who become part of the state. They have become citizen. They are your responsibility to take care of them. As any other citizen, whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim, they are supposed to be taking care of it in the same manner when they are under the state. So that when it comes to the Mishq, it came into the power of the Muslim, under the control of the Muslims, partially by force and other part by uh, by the treaties. Ibn Kathir, he mentions, he says the story narrated by Saif ibn Umar suggested that the conquest of Damascus took place, he says, 13 a year after Hijrah. But the Saif also states the same as the majority, or the majority of the scholars, they say that it happened in the middle of the Rajab of the 14th year after Hijrah. So that is more sound than the 13. And Khalifa ibn Khayyat stated that Abu Ubaidah besieged the Byzantines in Damascus in Rajab, Sha'ban, Ramadan, and Shawwal. Then the peace treaty came in Dhul Qa'dah. So he's talking about longer period of time. As we know, see, these are, when we talk about reports like that, when the news travel from one area to another area, these kind of things not necessarily can be exact, but it is as exact as possible that can be reported. Of course, the reality is that the Damascus of Damascus was opened by the Muslims in the time of Umar ibn Khattab. It could be a few months here, a few months there, or a year or 2 years here and there. In the reporting can be checked later on, but it's not as important as we may think of. Okay, then one of the few things that we see is like Khalid bin Walid radiallahu an, even he was under the Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah radiallahu an's leadership, he continued his efforts. He tried his utmost, tries to win the battle, and it did not affect Khalid bin Walid that he was not the one who was the main leader of the army. It did not affect him, whether he's a leader or a regular soldier. He continued to do whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded. Now, after the conquest of Damascus, Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah sent Khalid bin Walid to the area called Biqa or Bika, which was conquered by force. So this area, Biqa, was conquered by force, and there was an army sent by Byzantines under the area called Ain Minsun. Ain Minsun is an area where a lot of Muslims were martyred, and it was under the leadership of Sinan. And there were so many Muslims were martyred. That area is even also called Ain al-Shuhada. Ain means spring, and Shuhada, the martyrs. So it's the spring of martyrs, because many of the Muslims were martyred, but still the Muslims were able to conquer the area. And Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah radiallahu an, he appointed Yazid ibn Abi Sufyan in charge of Damascus. So we can see kind of things that Yazid ibn Abi Sufyan, he's the brother of Muawiyah radiallahu an. So Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, later on, he becomes the governor of the Damascus or Shaam. That's in the story, inshallah, I will talk about some other time. But Yazid was his brother, and he's the one who was left as in charge of Damascus. Then Yazid sent Dihaya ibn Khalifa to Tadmur with detachment troops to conquer it, and he also sent Abu Zahra al-Qushayri to Bathania and Hawran. So Hawran is another famous area in current Syria as well, and where he made peace treaties with their people. And Sharhabil ibn Hassana conquered all the Jordan by force, except Tabariya or Tibris. With those people, he made a peace treaty. And Khalid took over the land of Al-Balqa. So these are the areas I want to talk about today. And inshallah, we'll talk about the Battle of Fihl and the Homs and Palestine, try to cover it next week or next week after, inshallah. If there is any questions or comments about today's subject, inshallah, I'll try to